Alex Pretti, and you may disagree with this, actually, but to me it feels different even from Renee Nicole Good, and I don't fully understand why. Do you?
Well, I think it does feel a little bit different from Renee Nicole Good, which is not in any way, James, to disparage Renee Nicole Good, because I think it's absolutely evident that she was shot in cold blood by a trigger-happy ICE agent, yes, and that she was, at the time of her killing, posing no particular threat to that ICE agent. But in the case of Alex Pretti, I mean, the distinction is that he was absolutely exercising his entirely legal rights to observe and film the enforcement operations that were being conducted by the Border Patrol. At no point does, in any of the videos, at no point do you see him goading or engaging with those Border Patrol agents. In fact, what they do is approach him and another woman on the streets. They knock the other woman to the ground, and Mr. Pretti, who at this point only has one thing in his hand, and that's a cell phone, puts his other hand up to indicate that he's going to go and render some assistance to this woman who's been thrown to the ground. He is, after all, an intensive care unit nurse. As he is trying to render assistance to her, the Border Patrol descend upon him and the woman. They pepper spray both of them, and then they begin pummeling Mr. Pretti. And, you know, there is no indication whatsoever that he posed any kind of threat to them at all. No indication that any of the mendacious claims made by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, you know, that he was a would-be assassin, that he's arrived at the scene to try and kill as many immigration enforcement agents as possible. There is no indication to support any of those claims. He wasn't, as they claim, brandishing his weapon. In fact, the ICE agents take his weapon off him before they then fire 10 bullets into the Border Patrol agents, I should say. They take his weapon off him before they fire 10 bullets into him. And, of course, the other massive difference here is that Alex Pretti was exercising his Second Amendment rights under the American Constitution legally to carry that pistol. Now, we can all discuss why on earth anybody would show up at a protest carrying a loaded gun, and from the distance of London or other European capitals, that obviously looks like very bizarre behaviour. But in the context of Minnesota and in the context of America, where you have the Trump administration going to the mat to defend the Second Amendment rights of Americans to bear arms, well, Mr. Pretti was engaged in his Second Amendment right to bear arms. He was legally permitted to carry that gun. He had done everything right in terms of gun ownership, and that, of course, is one of the reasons why the National Rifle Association posted on social media yesterday saying responsible public voices should be awaiting a full investigation, not making generalizations and demonizing law-abiding citizens, by which they mean Mr. Pretti. He was, at the moment of his killing, as far as all of the video suggests, absolutely a law-abiding citizen.
You talk about the old two countries divided by a foreign language, by a common language thing, which is never truer than with regard to guns. I'm always a little bit wary when this happens. You've just spoken, and while you were speaking, I was thinking, and my thoughts have led me to a place, and I'm going to say it out loud, and you're going to tell me that I'm wrong. If Alex Pretti hadn't been carrying a gun, the reaction of the administration would not be currently looking a little bit like an investigation or a climb down.
Absolutely, without question. You are absolutely right. And it's one of the reasons, of course, why the killing of Renee Nicole Good did not result in any kind of climb down. I mean, if she'd been legally carrying a weapon
Simon,
in her car...
I know you live there,
yes,
and I know you're used to it, but this is
insane.
absolutely insane.
But James, to put it into context, I was just looking up the numbers to remind myself. Do you know how many Americans in 2024 took tried to take guns through security checkpoints at an American airport. The TSA in 2024 intercepted 6,678 firearms at airport security checkpoints, and 94% of them were loaded. So when Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem starts talking about why would anybody show up at a protest with a gun rather than a sign? Well, I don't know, Ms. Noem, but why does anybody show up at an American airport with a loaded gun when they know they're not going to get it through the security checkpoint? Why is the right of Americans to show up at schools with guns, to show up in movie theaters with guns, to show up at football games with guns? Why is that okay, but showing up at a protest with a gun somehow triggers the notion that this man is a would-be assassin? And so what they've really found themselves in difficulty over is the gun ownership with Alex Pretti and Donald Trump's sort of partial Well, now, of course, the issue is going to be compounded because President Trump's sort of partial climb down last night, and he appeared in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. Not coincidental, a Murdoch newspaper that yesterday accused the US government of lying about what had taken place in Minneapolis. The fact that he last night appeared to be committing to some sort of an investigation suggests that he knows how much difficulty he's in. And you've got to, if you read that interview, it's very brief, it's a 5-minute phone conversation he had with the Wall Street Journal. You've got to wonder if he's preparing to drop some of these officials who have gone way out on a limb in calling Mr. Pretti a would-be assassin. Is he about to pull the rug out from under them?
He may have to. I mean, again, we're in completely uncharted waters in the context of Western democracies. And I'm just sort of zoning in on that observation that you're highlighting and articulating perfectly. From the perspective of pandering to or managing the base, the problem here is not that Alex Pretti was shot dead in cold blood. It's the fact that he was carrying a weapon shortly before he was shot dead in broad daylight. In cold blood. I get it. I just wanted to get that out there because I can't still quite believe these words are emerging. And I want to talk to you briefly about another story that's been completely swamped by recent events and probably rightly so, but it's a story that you brought to our attention some time ago. But before we do that, what happens now? The people on the streets of Minneapolis aren't going to be going anywhere in a hurry. Tim Walz has been very impressive in his Well, here's a question for you. Why, when Kristi Noem moots the possibility of removing agents from the streets of Minneapolis, is she asking for election records and the electoral register in return?
Absolutely extraordinary. And the answer, of course, is that the federal government is demanding, the Trump administration, that every single American state hands its electoral registers over to the White House because the White House says it wants to examine those electoral registers and make sure that everybody on them is properly on those electoral rolls. Now, this is coming from a Republican Party that allegedly believes in states' rights. And remember, we don't have one election in the United States. We have 50 of them. They're all organized by each individual state. Many Republican states have dutifully handed those electoral registers over. The Democrats, of course, are fighting the request in court. But the reason why they want to get their hands on it, many critics of the administration contend, is because once you've got the electoral register, you've got the power. You've got the power to disrupt elections, to challenge the outcome of elections by saying, well, Mr. Gonzalez from Acacia Avenue in Houston, Texas, I mean, we need to see proof that he is an American citizen and he has a right to vote. Wow. So this is all part of preparations for massive jiggery-pokery in November.
Great use of the phrase jiggery-pokery, and thank you for making me smile during such dark times. You were the first, I think, certainly on this programme, to moot the possibility of there being no midterms. What are the odds on that now, in your view?
Well, whether the midterms take place or not, I think is almost not the central question. I think the question is, will midterm elections take place in a time-honoured, free and fair fashion? And that, I think, is much more unlikely now than the likelihood of the prospect of the midterms themselves being cancelled. I think that jiggery-pokery, they are lining it up. They are already beginning it. We've seen the gerrymandering, the redistricting that's taking place in so many states in a bid to try and game the outcome of it. But you certainly can't rule out anything happening depending on the state of the streets in this country by the time we get to, September, October.
And you will be steering us through that, no doubt, as well. To take us back to something else that you explained to us at the time, and that is the removal, essentially, from the streets of the United States. I'm harking back to a fonder era now, Simon, when people were just being scooped off the streets without any apparent reason, rather than shot dead. But I refer to Rumeysa Ozturk, the student who seemed to have been taken into custody by ICE officials for doing little more than writing an op-ed in support of the Palestinian cause in the Middle East. This story has developed a bit after the unsealing of documents, I think.
Yes, and to be clear, she was seized off the streets for writing an opinion piece that was critical of Israel and that was calling on her university, Tufts, to engage in divestment from Israel. And, it was very clear at the time that for the Trump administration, criticism of Israel, any outward support, not just, of course, for Hamas, but outward support for the Palestinian cause, was generally placing students in jeopardy. Now we know, thanks to the release of some of these court documents through partly the reporting as well of Mother Jones magazine, that the government was engaged in a coordinated effort to scour one particular website, but others as well, that were gathering information that was sort of crowdsourced from people who were contributing information and saying, you need to look at this article that this woman's written for the student newspaper at Tufts. You need to look at the words that this protester used at a particular university. I mean, this is how the government was focused on particular students and others that it decided to pursue in what it maintains was a campaign to protect free speech in the United States, but absolutely crack down on what they claimed falsely were terrorist sympathizers in many cases on the campuses of American universities. And as I think you and I said at the time, much of this started on social media. Some of these students found themselves being arrested, having their visas revoked, simply because a crowd-funded effort to Secretary of State Marco Rubio or at Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem on X and other social media platforms drew the government's attention when the numbers of people doing that were sufficient. But now we know it was an even more organised effort using some of these more obscure websites that themselves were serving as clearinghouses essentially for people who wanted to bring information to the government's attention.
And indeed see anybody criticising Israel arrested and essentially abducted, I think is probably a reasonable word to use in this context. All parts, it's increasingly difficult to resist the conclusion that these are all parts of the same pattern. Simon Marks, thank you.